Hey guys, this is Nate English from EnglishEndurance.com, and today I want to talk about training volume and how much training you should be doing overall and how much training you should be doing each week, and just kind of an overall kind of strategy for how to get the most out of your training from a volume standpoint. So I think a lot of people need to at least put a little bit of thought into this, and they should think about, where they're at in their development and what their goals are. So, how long you've been an athlete training for, cycling or running or triathlon or whatever sport it is, and how much training you've done in the past is all going to be really relevant for setting a baseline for what's reasonable for you. And you want to make sure that your training is challenging but not overwhelming. So if you have a history of training, let's say 8 hours a week or 12 hours a week, if you have the flexibility in your schedule, you shouldn't just arbitrarily think, I want to do, road racing or stage racing, or I want to go do Ironman triathlon, so I'm just going to go out and do 18 hours a week of training. I mean, that might be great for some people, but it might be really quite excessive for some people if they don't have kind of a baseline of several years of training at progressively higher volumes to be able to cope with that. So you want to think about where you're coming from and what you've been used to and what's going to be reasonable for you at this stage in your development as an athlete. And you want to think about what your goals are and what you're trying to get out of your training or out of your sport. So, for some people, let's say that are cyclists and maybe they do crit racing and all of their races are just an hour long or even less, they don't necessarily need to get in a ton of training volume for that. Doing a 3-hour ride with some intervals might be actually very productive training for somebody that does crit racing, but doing a 5 or 6 hour long ride isn't necessarily going to help them, progress towards their goal of becoming a better crit racer. On the other hand, if you just want to go out and enjoy riding and the social aspect of cycling is really valuable to you, and you just have a lot of buddies that you like going out for long rides on the weekend, I mean, that's something to take into consideration and just recognize, what your goals are for, your day-to-day riding and training, and how much the social aspect of it matters to you, how much just the enjoyment of doing long rides matters to you, and, maybe if you're competitive, like what your competitive goals are, so that you make sure that your riding is, your training is in line with whatever your goals are. I think a lot of times people kind of just get stuck in a routine out of habit because of however long their friends ride. They go riding with their friends and they do 3 hours on the weekends, or they do 5 hours or whatever it is, but it's not always directly in line with whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So, I would just take that into account. On the other hand, like let's say you want to do road racing or stage racing or long course triathlon, for example, and you need to get really long training sessions in. If you have buddies that go riding on the weekend and they just do, let's say 3 hours or 4 hours, but you really need to get in a lot more training because of what your goals are, you should just think about, maybe starting out with them and then adding another few hours afterwards if that's going to be relevant to your goals. Outside of that, everyone has their own constraints in their schedule. Most of us have jobs, and that really puts a lot of constraint on their weekday scheduling. And then, of course, a lot of people have family and maybe social obligations that take up a lot of their other time on the weekend, let's say. So, whatever constraints you have, it can be daunting to think about training for, let's say, Ironman triathlon or road racing or stage racing or something that, would require a lot of endurance, and you would think that you would want to get a lot of training time in. And then you look at your schedule and maybe you can only train like an hour a day on the weekdays and longer on the weekends. I mean, yeah, maybe in an ideal world, you could have a lot more flexibility in your schedule. But at the same time, if you have constraints like that and you can only get to a spin class or go for short rides on the weekdays and then do longer sessions on the weekends, I mean, that kind of makes your whole, the task of planning your training and trying to get the most out of it a lot simpler. Ultimately, you want to get in the most amount of training that's going to be beneficial to you. And by beneficial, I mean it's going to help you towards your fitness goals, it's going to be enjoyable, and it's going to be manageable for you physically. Because if you have a history of training, 8 hours a week, you can't just double that because you feel like you want to. Likewise, if you aren't going to enjoy training as much as might benefit you physically, and you're going to, stop getting as much pleasure out of your training and out of your, weekly routine, you should take that into consideration. So whether you're training 10 hours a week or 6 hours a week or 16 hours a week, you should try to keep in line what your priorities are, what you're going to enjoy, and what's going to benefit you for your ultimate fitness goals. So to try to give some slightly more specific guidelines, let's say you're just getting into road racing or crit racing and you've been riding for a couple of years, but now you're trying to do some more focused training. I think that a lot of people can really get a lot out of anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a week. And I think that most people that have been riding for a few years, most people can handle that approximate volume of training pretty well. Unless you're doing a ton of running, there's not that much stress on your body from cycling that 8 or 12 hours a week is going to really, be terribly stressful on your body. You can get a lot of fitness out of 8 to 12 hours a week. Even if you have more restrictions on your schedule and you can only do, let's say, 6 or 8 hours a week, you can do a lot with that amount of time. It's just a matter of trying to maximize the efficiency of your training to get the most out of it, and also paying attention to things like diet and sleep and maybe cross training that you might do, like if you go to the gym. All of those things can have a big impact on making your training more effective. When it comes to people that maybe have been racing for a few years and maybe they're a Cat 1-2 road racer, or you want to get up into, let's say, long course Ironman triathlon, then you really need to start looking at trying to get more training time in. But even at that level, I think that you can really do a lot with just 12 hours a week on average. I think sometimes you might want to bump it up more towards like 15 or 16 hours a week, if at all possible. And even if you have all the time in the world, more training is definitely not better. In a lot of cases, more training is just more, but it's actually less effective than doing a very efficient job, because the more you train and the more energy you spend on, riding and running and whatever sport you're doing, the less energy you have to recover from the training sessions that you're doing. So until you're a world-class Ironman triathlete and training 20 hours a week and you've been doing it for years, I wouldn't even worry about trying to train, all that much. You should always be paying attention to how you feel and paying attention to how well you're progressing. And ideally, on the one hand, you want to make sure that your training is challenging, because if it's not challenging, it's not really training. You're just kind of being active, but you're not really progressing necessarily. But you want to make sure that it's not too challenging, that you are overwhelming your body's ability to adapt, and that from week to week, you're not just getting more and more tired. You want to get tired after your harder sessions, and you want to do that somewhat regularly, like at least once or twice a week. But from week to week, you want to keep feeling like you're a little bit stronger and a little bit fitter, and you can do the same sessions or slightly harder sessions than you did a week ago or a month ago, and just keep doing them a little bit better. So you can keep kind of building momentum. Just how you feel when you get up in the morning and how you feel when you start your training sessions is really important. If you start your hard workouts and you're looking forward to them, and you know that you're gonna, be able to do it as well or better than you did last week or a month ago, that's great. If you're dreading every hard workout that you're doing or every long ride, you should start looking at whether or not you need to get maybe a little bit of a reduction in your total training volume, or you should build up a little more slowly, or maybe you should cut down a little bit on your intensity and just do 2 workouts a week to get a little more recovery instead of 3, for example. A lot of the time when it comes down to it, if you can get in a really good long session on the weekend to keep your endurance up, and then you can get in just a couple of decent quality sessions during the week, that can really provide you plenty of training to be in very good shape. And when it comes down to it, somebody that trains 8 hours a week but makes a lot of efficient use of that time is going to be better off in the short term and in the long term than somebody that has a very inefficient, not very effective, let's say 12-hour routine, where they're training a lot more time, but they're just not getting as much out of it because it's not as focused and it's not as effective for whatever their goals are. So always be looking for ways to get the right amounts of the right kinds of intensities in, and make sure you can get in a long ride or a long run that is effective for whatever your goals are. And then don't worry about it if you can't train more than you're allowed to train because of your schedule. I mean, all of us have kind of constraints in our lives, so we just want to keep things in balance and make sure that we're getting the most out of it and that we're enjoying the whole process. And along those lines of trying to make the most out of things, let's say you're a bike racer and most of what you do is riding. A lot of times, let's say you could train 12 hours a week if you wanted to. A lot of times, like let's say you train 12 hours a week and all you did was ride. sometimes it might be better actually to get a little bit higher quality training in and do a little bit less time. Maybe if you go to the gym a couple times a week and you do a couple of workouts where you do some intervals and then you do a longer endurance ride on the weekends, that kind of routine might actually be a lot more effective than a training plan that just has a lot of volume and not very much intensity and no cross training. So just think about what it is that you're going to enjoy doing in training, and then what's going to be effective for, you know, reaching whatever goals you have. So I think that's it for this video. Hopefully some of that was useful to you, and I really hope that you get something out of these videos. Go ahead and hit me up if you have any questions, and subscribe if you want to see when I put out more material like this. I'll definitely put out some videos that have more specific details about how to, you know, schedule your week and do specific workouts and stuff like that. But today I just wanted to go over kind of the broader topic of how much training time you might want to be doing and maybe how to think about that. Because it's not just training time, it's also like what you do with that training. But anyway, that's it for this one, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.